Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex topics, taking insights from various sources and turning them into, well, a clear conversation.
That's the goal.
And today, we're looking at a nation's development story, one that honestly often gets viewed through a pretty narrow lens.
It does, yeah.
Our mission here is to dig a bit deeper than the usual labels. We want to understand a truly indigenous approach to progress. We're talking about Eritrea. It's a country with a really unique vision, deeply rooted in its history. And it offers, I think, a fresh take on what sustainable development can actually mean.
It really does. It challenges some common assumptions.
Okay, so let's get into it. When we talk about national development, often we think about global frameworks, right?
Right, like the UN's Sustainable Development Goals.
Exactly, the SDGs, or maybe the African Union's Agenda 2063. And those are, of course, super important benchmarks.
Absolutely. They provide a common ground.
But what happens when a country has basically been working towards those same kinds of goals for decades, long before these frameworks even existed, and doing it, on its own terms, with its own philosophy?
Well, that's what's so fascinating about Eritrea. Its story often gets misunderstood precisely because people try to filter it through these external benchmarks.
Ah, so the benchmarks can actually obscure things.
They can, yeah. While they're useful for comparison, they sometimes miss the nuances of a country's own long-standing and very distinct approach.
I see.
The sources we looked at show that Eritrea, even well before its formal independence in '91, had already embedded core principles. Things like social justice, equality, human dignity.
Environmental stewardship, too?
Environmental stewardship, shared prosperity, absolutely. These were woven into its national vision and policies right from the start.
So not adopted later from some global playbook.
Not at all. They were intrinsic, part of its foundation.
Okay, so it's not a case of Eritrea playing catch-up then, or just adopting global priorities when they became fashionable.
Not really, no. It suggests a unique path, and in many ways, a path that actually anticipated some of these global goals.
That really challenges the idea that there's only one way forward, one externally defined path to progress.
Exactly.
And what's really compelling, as you mentioned, the sources emphasize this, is that this isn't some new strategy for Eritrea.
Not at all. These values go deep. They're embedded in its modern history, tracing back decades, even into the liberation struggle.
Right. So connecting that to the bigger picture, the armed struggle for independence wasn't just about sovereignty in the political sense.
No, it was much broader. It was simultaneously about achieving a whole societal vision.
Which included?
Well, things like social justice, real gender equality, getting rid of poverty, securing universal human rights, and ensuring shared prosperity for everybody.
Wow. So those weren't just afterthoughts.
Definitely not. They weren't reactive policies added on later. They were fundamental aspects of the national identity, the very reason for the struggle itself.
Is there something concrete that illustrates this long-term vision?
Yes, a really powerful example is the National Charter. It was adopted back in February 1994 in Nakfa. And this charter, it still serves as a foundational guide for the country today. If you look at its objectives, they remarkably align with, and honestly, in many ways, antedated the SDGs and Agenda 2063 by decades.
Decades?
Yeah. It clearly lays out this aspiration for a prosperous, unified, just nation, a place where citizens can fulfill their potential, in a peaceful, healthy, sustainable environment.
That's quite something. It speaks to a really consistent long-term commitment that predates a lot of the international conversations we have now.
It really does.
But these sound like lofty goals, aspirations. How did Eritrea translate these into actual tangible outcomes, especially in areas like social justice and equity? What does that look like for everyday people, particularly given, well, the resource constraints of a developing nation?
That's a critical question, isn't it? How do you make these commitments real, especially when resources are tight? Eritrea's core focus has been on making sure that groups that were historically vulnerable or marginalized get genuinely equal opportunities. They talk about creating a sort of optimal developmental ecosystem for upward social mobility.
Okay, an ecosystem, but what does that mean practically? Is it just policy talk?
No, it seems much more concrete than that. It's reflected in things like providing free healthcare and free education.
Free at all levels.
Yes, from primary school right through to university. And what's really interesting, given the resource constraints you mentioned, is how they've done it.
Right, the how.
So, for example, the sources mention a really effective community health worker program. It brings primary care out to even the most remote villages.
Using local people.
Exactly. Leveraging local expertise and existing social structures, rather than just relying on big centralized hospitals everywhere. It shows a kind of practical grassroots innovation.
I see. And education.
Similar approach. A strong emphasis on localized teacher training, developing curricula that reflect national needs and values, trying to ensure it's relevant and sustainable.
Makes sense.
And alongside that, they've put in place a whole range of social protection measures. Things specifically designed to safeguard the most disadvantaged, to sort of level the playing field.
That's quite comprehensive.
It is. And, many wealthier nations don't actually guarantee these kinds of fundamental rights to all their citizens. So, Eritrea's deliberate choice to prioritize inclusivity, fairness, human dignity, even when facing significant challenges. That's quite distinctive. It says a lot about their values.
It really does underscore that prioritization of human well-being, perhaps over just pure economic numbers. A deep commitment. Now, let's shift gears a bit. One of the things you often hear about Eritrea, or maybe misunderstandings, is about its principle of self-reliance. It sometimes gets labeled as isolationism or even autarky.
Right. Those labels come up a lot.
So can you unpack that? What does self-reliance actually mean in the Eritrean context, based on what we've seen? How is it different from those, frankly, quite negative labels?
Yeah, this is a really crucial distinction, and it gets misinterpreted globally quite often. It's important to define terms. Autarky implies total economic self-sufficiency, a closed-off economy.
Right. No trade.
Pretty much. And isolationism suggests pulling back from world affairs entirely.
Okay.
But the sources we reviewed present Eritrea's self-reliance very differently. It's framed as a strategic choice for principled engagement, not withdrawal.
Principled engagement. So not rejecting the world.
Not at all. It doesn't mean rejecting international partnerships.
Yeah.
Far from it. But it insists they must be genuine, they must be equitable, and crucially, they have to complement Eritrea's own nationally identified priorities.
So partnerships on their own terms.
Essentially, yes. They'll accept, say, time-bound assistance if it addresses a specific need they've identified locally and if it genuinely strengthens their own institutions, kind of like a bridging gap, not a permanent crutch.
Got it.
But what they explicitly reject is aid that comes with suffocating conditions or aid that risks creating structural dependency, which ultimately undermines their autonomy.
So the focus shifts away from handouts.
Dramatically. It shifts away from what they see as potentially debilitating perpetual aid towards focusing on investment and trade, leveraging their own strengths, like their strategic location, their endowments.
Such as?
Well, the sources talk about specific initiatives, things like expanding sustainable fish farming aquaculture in the Dahlak archipelago, investing in port infrastructure to boost regional trade, and focusing on adding value in Eritrea, like processing fish or minerals, rather than just exporting raw materials. That's a key part of their industrial plan, participating in global markets, but on their own terms.
So it's less about withdrawing and more about safeguarding sovereignty, making sure citizens are the primary authors of their own development story.
That seems to be the core idea, yes.
But I imagine some listeners might think, well, minimizing external aid, doesn't that risk slower growth or limited access to global tech and expertise? Do the sources talk about any trade-offs here? Or maybe areas where Eritrea does strategically engage for specific benefits?
That's a fair point, and yes, the sources do touch on that complexity. It's not a blanket rejection of everything external. The key word is strategic selectivity.
Strategic selectivity, okay.
So for instance, while they prioritize funding most infrastructure internally, they actively seek foreign direct investment, FDI, but in specific sectors like mining or energy.
Oh. Okay.
But, and this is crucial, it's always with clear agreements about national benefit, about technology transfer, things that build their own capacity.
And the trade-off.
Well, the sources suggest the trade-off might sometimes be a slower initial pace of growth compared to countries getting massive aid injections.
Right.
But the argument is that the long-term benefit is a more robust, more self-sustaining economy, one that's less vulnerable to external shocks, like donors changing their policies or priorities.
Which seems particularly relevant right now.
Exactly. It's proven quite prescient today, actually. We're seeing this global trend where development assistance is scaling back. And in that context, countries that became heavily dependent on aid, they're facing severe challenges now. devastating consequences sometimes for essential services, for development goals.
Difficult situation.
Very. But Eritrea, by contrast, because of this long-standing focus on building internal capacity, minimizing reliance on handouts, prioritizing self-reliance and investment, it's comparatively less vulnerable.
Interesting.
Instead of scrambling to fill sudden funding gaps, it's been able to continue its development path based on its own resources, its institutions, that strong social solidarity we mentioned, and investment, both domestic and foreign.
It really demonstrates the sort of durability of their chosen path, a resilience built from within.
I think that's a good way to put it. It offers a powerful counter-narrative to the idea that development must rely heavily on external aid.
Absolutely. Now, beyond the policy and the economics, you mentioned social solidarity. The sources point to this as another powerful foundation. Solidarity, generosity, mutual support. What does that actually look like in the social fabric of Eritrea? How does it play out in daily life?
Yeah, these are pillars that often get missed in standard economic or political analyses, but they seem absolutely central to the country's social fabric.
Rooted in tradition.
Deeply rooted, yes, in both faith and tradition. Christianity emphasizes giving. Islam has zakat almsgiving as a fundamental pillar. And across Eritrea's diverse ethnic and linguistic groups, there's this incredibly high value placed on collective responsibility, on looking out for each other.
How is that taught or passed down?
Well, from an early age, the message seems to be that, yes, communities are made of individuals, but the survival and the flourishing of those individuals really depends on the strength of the whole group, the collective.
And you see that in practice.
Definitely. People routinely come together, helping each other till fields, plant crops, build homes, develop community projects, whether it's in villages or city neighborhoods.
Are there specific examples?
The sources mention things like the traditional mobber system.
Yeah.
It's where community members pool resources, pool labor for collective benefit.
Like for building something.
Yeah, maybe fixing a school roof or helping a family that's hit a crisis. It's that spirit of solidarity. And apparently it was absolutely vital during the COVID-19 pandemic a few years back.
How so?
It helped mobilize resources quickly, share the burdens, mitigate the hardships across the country. It created this kind of interconnected web of local support, protecting the most vulnerable rather than just waiting for top-down government action.
It sounds like more than just kindness, almost like a profound sense of duty. A social contract.
Precisely. That captures it well. Supporting those less fortunate, or those who are vulnerable, or those who sacrifice for the nation, it's widely seen as a fundamental moral responsibility, something that actually underpins the stability of society.
And this connects back to the history, too.
Very clearly. You see it in the enduring support for war veterans and for the families of martyrs, and also in the continuous contributions from the Eritrean diaspora community around the world.
Honoring the sacrifices made for independence.
Exactly. The immense sacrifices made for independence and sovereignty seem to have instilled this collective duty, a duty to honor that legacy through ongoing acts of generosity, unwavering solidarity. It's not just history, it's a living value shaping today's interactions.
Wow. Okay, so we've taken quite a deep dive today into Eritrea's very distinctive development vision.
We have.
Moving beyond those common, often incomplete labels to see a nation that seems to have historically rooted its progress in social justice, in a very principled, strategic approach to self-reliance and this incredibly powerful sense of solidarity. It really is a story of an indigenous approach, one that, as you said, often anticipated global goals and continues to prioritize its people, its sovereignty, charting its own course.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is how easily the unique path and the real achievements of a nation can get obscured or maybe oversimplified when we only use external frameworks to measure them. Recognizing Eritrea's own historically grounded vision, rooted in that struggle for independence, that insistence on genuine self-reliance, the deep solidarity, community responsibility, it's just essential for understanding.
It's not isolationist, not just reactive.
No. It presents this resilient indigenous model. And it offers, I believe, a distinct and valuable contribution to the whole global conversation about what sustainable and inclusive progress can look like. It shows development can be authentically driven from within.
So thinking about all this, it leaves us with a question for you, the listener. How might understanding Eritrea's approach, its focus on self-reliance, that grassroots delivery of universal services, the strong community solidarity, how might that challenge or maybe expand your own ideas about what progress truly means for nations around the world?
What can we learn?
Yeah, what might we learn when we look beyond the usual benchmarks and really try to appreciate a country's own historically shaped, internally driven path? Something to think about.